and welcome, dear listeners, to this podcast on the Michael Haynes channel, The Moonraker. And I am here with my good buddy Michael. Say hi to the good people.
Hello, good people.
And we're going to be talking about fantasy, writing, books, and anything else that comes to mind, essentially. I'm curious, what have you been reading lately, and what have you been writing lately?
Well, lately I've been revisiting the classics. I've been reading through the Savage Tales of Solomon Kane again. Um, really, really good book. I do recommend to pick it up. It's fairly cheap. You get all of the Robert E. Howard Solomon Kane stories all in one book. Fantastic. I've been going back through that again, and for basically some motivation and some inspiration. I always go to that book for inspiration. And lately, I've been sort of doing some lore aspects behind the world, a little bit of world building. And I've just finished the first draft of a poem. Yes, even poems have drafts, believe it or not. I'm putting the finishing touches to a third story, which hopefully will be the first draft will be finished soon, this week, hopefully. Other than that, not much else.
Hmm. Have you read Sword Woman and other historical adventures? That's also Howard.
No, I've been reading his more Lovecraftian sort of stories, really. They're criminally undermentioned. Do recommend them. Must admit, his sort of more horror-based stories, because obviously Howard and Lovecraft were very, very good friends. Both tragic tales of having their fame far too late. Because obviously, I think they only became famous after they were both dead, which is really, really unfortunate when you think the amount of people out there who get fame for being absolutely terrible.
Yeah, the modern day world of fiction and specifically fantasy is just something that I'm coming to again by talking to you and talking to other people and having to research more into it because I've been away from it for so long. Nothing interests me, even when there are good writers and I can recognize that they're good writers. The stories that they're telling simply don't interest me. Yeah, last fiction that I read was Prometheus Rising by Jason Kuna. Excellent book, absolutely excellent. And he set up the world in a way that allows him to write short stories about it or go back, write about different ages. His story is not closed. He didn't trap himself in. He was very careful to build up a world that allows him to return and to expand on it. I asked because even though it was only, 12 years, Howard seems to have left a lot of work out there. Have you gone through a majority of it, or is there still stuff that you need to go back to?
Well, I'm blasting through the Conan stuff, hopefully, but soon. I've just got to finish the book I'm reading now, which is basically the Savage Tales of Solomon Kane, go through that and then go back into Conan and the magazines that they've done as well. But, I mean, Solomon Kane I think he's nearly 100 years old, the actual character, and is still relevant even today. Because unfortunately, one thing Robert E. Howard didn't have was a massive backlog. Well, the backlog he actually has is impressive. I think he commits suicide at 30, which to have that much content in such a short span, and such not just content, but excellent content as well. I highly recommend all of this stuff. It's quite a phenomenal achievement, really.
It was also a different age where people didn't have all the distractions that they have today. Of course, the education system was better. He was in a more homogeneous population and he had an understanding of himself, so he knew what stories to draw from. He had his own culture to draw from. Modern day fiction writers, specifically European ones, have lost so much of that. They don't understand the well from which all of these greater mythologies and grand stories and grand worlds come from. Because they're not tapped into that. They're not tapped into their culture. They actively reject it. But for Howard's time, it was very different. The worldview was different. It was more sane. You mentioned that, yeah, you mentioned some of the things that you've been writing lately. and you wrote a poem recently. What's this one about?
Well, this the one I finished earlier this week. Well, yesterday because it's only Tuesday. Is actually about the Pacific land in the story my book's based in. Quite quick, short one. I don't want to go too much into it to spoil the mystery behind it. But that's basically what it's all about. It's about the Old North, is what it's called. It's a poem. I know it's short, but you can have short stuff as impactful. That's one thing I've learned about reading pulp and different things like that. It's short stories have a lot of impact put into it, and it just doesn't let you go. Well, good pulp anyway. So, but that's what it's about. It's just the land itself, well, part of it.
Yeah, that's the whole point when it's a short story or something of the kind. Because it doesn't fit into a grand world, you can't immerse people in as deeply, but you're supposed to still leave them with an impact. And that impact's going to be emotional primarily. That's how you're going to get it across. All the best short stories are unique, they're very different, and they have an emotional impact.
Yeah, and the other thing I found, especially with Solomon Kane, with Robbie Howard, it's not just this writing style is still unique even to this day with how he describes characters. He doesn't go into full vivid detail. He leaves a lot to the reader's imagination. There's a particular line where I think it's Wings in the Night. It's one of my, I think it's probably my favourite. It's either that or The Moon of Skulls is my favourite. Where he describes Solomon Kane as how basically built by the savage economy of the wolf to describe his appearance and how like his body and stuff like that, which to me is an art lost to this day, which I try and tend to bring in my stories once. Well, hopefully they'll get popular enough for people to start reading them. And to me, that's a far better style than nowadays, because it's not just in books, but you get it in like games and films where everything has to be explained in painstaking detail. Basically, the player or the reader, what have you, doesn't have to use their imagination, and I think that's a terrible tragedy.
Yeah, as far as that goes, I'm not in a position to speak to whether or not it's been taken too far. The over description of characters or things of this nature. I can't quite say, but is there anyone modern that you think avoids these kinds of issues? Is there any modern day authors that you think are doing it right?
Not many. I must admit, not many. The one that's come closest to actually me is, you mentioned it just now, Jason Kona with Prometheus Rising. I've read it, thought it was fantastic. It's certainly more engaging than a lot of fantasy series out there, because at the moment everyone seems to think book series, oh, it's going to be Harry Potter. But to me, Harry Potter's got some of the most boring characters ever put down the pen, especially Harry Potter himself. You know, to be totally honest, I just want to Stone Cold Stunner him and let Voldemort win, because Voldemort's actually interesting. um, not, I mean, you got Brandon Sanderson. He's okay. He's Brandon Sanderson is a lot like many other authors. You go into a pub and you've got choices. You can have wine, you could have whiskey, but no, you go for the plain old normal beer. It's nice, it's all right, but it's what everyone has. Yeah, if that makes sense.
I haven't read Sanderson enough to have a good analysis on his work. Only watched some videos, and he seems to have a very down to earth, logical personality. His advice for writers doesn't seem bad, but even with good writing, yeah, it's the same thing that I mentioned before. Does the story appeal to you? Is it something that you really want to read? Fiction's so and fantasy just so expansive that there's almost a niche for for everybody. In what specific niches would you say that you fall in, or do you not want to categorize it? I mean, we already discussed Howard and Lovecraft, but any other kind of influences?
J.R. Tolkien, obviously. I don't really goes without saying, but
Mm-hmm.
I suppose the biggest influence is Michael Moorcock with Elric and Mel Benet. Not as much of an influence as it was on Sapkowski, to the point where I ripped off the whole thing and called it my own. But essentially, it's the order versus chaos aspect of Michael Moorcock that I like. I do think it's more true to life than say good versus evil. But unfortunately, even like order and chaos, like the moral ambiguity of Elric has been diluted to, oh, everything's grey and all this, where like anti-heroes is just basically, I beat up people, I make a wisecrack, I get paid to do it, aren't I an anti-hero? No, you're not. You're just Han Solo. Sorry. So Michael Moorcock definitely has an influence. Bernard Cornwell, who did the Sharp series, Warlord Chronicles, and the Saxon Chronicles as well. Definitely an inspiration for me. But that's pretty much it as far as influences are. Obviously, probably E. Howard, Lovecraft as well. Yeah, that's fairly it, really. So I don't really have a long list of influences, but the influences I do have, I'm not shy in broadcasting, because I mean, if I did like Michael Moorcock, I shamelessly stole the order versus chaos um, aspect of it, like many others out there. But the difference is that he's, from what I can tell, he's not that fussed by it. But it's like I will acknowledge the fact that order and chaos is something I do prefer compared to good and evil. It's the, I mean, Lord of the Rings, I can't exactly deny I like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and that I love those. I love the films. Well, apart from the last two Hobbit films. I love them. I love the characters. I love the world. But the one thing I don't like is I do get the sense of definite good versus definite evil, which
Mm-hmm.
for Tolkien at the time is understandable. It was the time he was in. Obviously, the experiences he had as well. But I can't take it away from the man. I think he's the best author to have ever lived. You know, I'm a massive fanboy, admittedly. Not the biggest fanboy. There's plenty out there who will knock me off my seat with their knowledge of Tolkien and his IPs. But yeah, I can't deny it. But yeah, I suppose really most of my influences is not really anyone I would say who's very modern, because to me, they're not. They're all the same. I mean, there's not really a defining style, or what they call a writer's voice. I hate that term, by the way. But yeah, apart from those, it's not really much else. Apart from the ones I mentioned. Look, I'll read their stuff, but they don't really have a lasting impression on how I approach writing and my stories.
And signature style is a good definition for it. What people call writer's voice. Really, you're talking about a unique style that the person has developed over time, where you can instantly recognize that it's them. Yeah, it's something that develops over time. It takes time. Yeah, what was the other series? Because that one I haven't heard of before. You mentioned one in there. You mentioned the word Saxon. Who was the author again?
That's Bernard Cornwell. They did the Sharp series as well, based in the Napoleonic Wars, but the series I mentioned, well, one of the two series, was called the Saxon Chronicles or Saxon Stories or something like that. Very, very good. Based basically around the time of Alfred the Great in England with the Viking invasion, where because I mean where I live now, a lot of it happened where I live. You know? So yeah, it really influenced me in some aspects because obviously it's placated in history. I mean, there's a history where everywhere I go around here, I can see remnants of those times to some degree. So they had not just a literacy influence on me, it also had an influence on me to actually go out and research and history behind my books and stuff like that. So that's a very good series. It was a television program. The first two series were decent. I haven't watched the third series. In some ways, I don't want to because it's on Netflix, and with the material they've been putting out in the last couple of years, I think we can safely say that it might not be that good. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, it's not just that series that influenced me as well. He did one called The Warlord Chronicles, which was about sort of a King Arthur stories, basically. That was pretty much influential on me. I'm yet to get the third book. I've only got the first two.
That's interesting. That's someone I hadn't heard of before. And you mentioned Sapolsky, if I'm not mistaken, is the writer for the Witcher series. Yeah, The Witcher was one of the few books that I liked when I was a teenager. But they have totally destroyed it. Of course, the Netflix series is simply anti-European garbage, and you can call it so because it is taking a story that's based on European folklore and cultures and mythology, etc., and it is erasing it. But it was, yeah, you were the one who brought it to my attention that at the very least he was highly inspired by Elric, and he himself claims to not have engaged in any plagiarism.
I will direct you to a video a YouTuber called Raise the Fist did about it. He explains it in far more detailed aspects than me. I mean, for me to actually sum it all off here, we'd be here till bloody midnight.
Oh, of
Um,
course not. Yeah, I know.
yeah,
I've seen that video before. I was just mentioning that. Yeah, Sapolsky was one of those that I liked because I found the idea of The Witcher interesting.
well,
I think it's a good story.
yes, that's just what I really. That's the reason why I don't really like him. I mean, as a natural person himself, he's a bit of an arse from what I've read and what I've seen. He's not exactly the nicest person in the world. I mean, I like the stories. It's just citation. The reason I bring it up as a fuss is the fact that he tries to claim it as all his own creation. When it's like, well, mate, just say you were inspired. Well, he's actually put down in the past that he was inspired by Elric.
Mm-hmm.
This is in Razor Fist's video as well, so that's why I do recommend you watch it because this is irrefutable evidence of the inspiration. Um, Again, citation. There's a difference between a thief and a hack. Now, I mean, I have shameless Robbie Howard worshipping in some of my stories, but I put my hands up to it and say, yeah, he was a heavy inspiration for me. So, I mean, obviously, I'm not fully ribbed, but I can't exactly deny that there are some elements of the character that's in my main character as well. Um, yeah, but I don't want to linger on it too much. But basically, citation, it's literally just saying, yeah, Elric was a massive inspiration for Geralt. And, well, not just Geralt, but Elric's lover, Cimmeril, is Yennefer's an exact copy almost. The world, how it was created, is an exact copy. Uh, the actual philosophical aspects of the world is an exact copy. Geralt himself is an exact. Yeah, I could. I don't want to go into it because, like I said, we'll be here for a very long time, and it can be summed up in a very, very well researched and constructed video. A video that took a very long time to come out, but then again, if you want to research something properly, research takes time. So,
Yeah.
um,
What do you think Elric did that was so good? And have you seen other Elric-like characters or Moorcock inspiration in other stories?
Oh, I mean, the concept of the multiverse, which isn't just Elric, but Hawkmoon, Erikoze, and the other Eternal Champions, has been basically used by DC and bloody Marvel to keep their ever waning magazine sales afloat. Um, in terms of Elric, like not just the character, but just the whole world itself. Like I don't like saying the term because it's been used more than bloody the condoms in Lindsay Lohan's house, but basically, like the law, order, and chaos aspect of Elric as well. The grey rather than black and white. So basically, it was written as I suppose, a rejoinder to Tolkien in a way. I don't want to come across as being an ass. But basically, instead of like a fated hero going off to somewhere to slay the dragon and become king and live happily after, which is Aragorn, Elric is basically a doomed duke who rides the dragon and steals souls. You know what I mean? So that's really the difference. Is the fact that Elric isn't a hero. I don't want to go into spoilers, but in some ways he's actually a villain.
That was also what I heard in Razorfist's description of the character. Yeah, and the multiverse thing is interesting. So you're saying Marvel and DC got that from Moorcock?
Yeah, pretty much. The way it's
Mm,
used and stuff like that, where there's always a hero, or in Michael Moorcock's case, a eternal champion, always summoning in to basically bring order to the chaos, which is how the eternal champions work. They exist in different realities, different timelines, etc., which is essentially Marvel and DC use to get crossovers or different heroes and stuff. So, um, like I said, it's the influence behind Elric has, to me, he and Robert E. Howard are like the Brian Cox of basically the fantasy world or literacy world, what have you, where basically they have done so much, been in everything, and they've influenced so many things, yet they don't get the recognition they deserve. Which is a bit like Brian Cox in the acting world, where he's been in so many things and he's done so many amazing performances, but no one really knows who he is, which is a shame.
and to prove that point, I had no idea who he was. I had to Google it. That aside, well, that's interesting to know. You know, when I think of DC and Marvel and the multiverse, that's one of the main reasons why I could never get into comics, specifically American comics. That idea of the multiverse pisses me off. I like to be able to pick up on a story. I don't like this idea that a character can just go on infinitely and forever, unless that's embedded in the character's nature, and some sort of a timeless being. But it always seemed to be, yeah, multiverse. This character or that character can't ever die. Endless stories. We can sell you endless comics and merchandise, and you can always keep recycling the same story. That's one of the things that I hated about Marvel and DC. It just comes across as recycling, and this then you're working with this person's interpretation on this character from however long ago, and you can fit the character for any agenda, as we're seeing these big comic companies. So always hated that. Never liked the multiverse in the comics world because of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you compare, say, modern day Batman to when I was growing up, 90s Batman, where Jimmy Page did the title track, which is why it's so good. The difference not only in the actual hero himself, but the style of the stories and how, because to me they're a bit darker, the stories from the 90s, not just Spider-Man but X-Men as well. To be totally honest, I was spoiled growing up watching those cartoons, I must admit. Compared to the bloody stuff they have to listen to, watch now, or even read. Especially read. Mark Waid is the death of the comic book industry, which, totally honestly, pretty much is dead at this point. It's on life support. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, but you've got so many different writers, but it's like, well, I think he should be like this, and it ends up, well, that's not who he is. Even worse in modern day, where they just can't leave politics out of their heroes. I mean, how many woke comics are out there? I mean, I'm not being funny, but Michael Moorcock was a hippie. Yeah, you wouldn't know that if you read his material. So it's just, to me, when you write anything that's filled with propaganda, which comic books, not just comics, but in all forms of media now, is just propaganda. And it's always terrible, be it left wing or right wing, especially right wing propaganda. That's just as bad. Don't write something for propaganda. Write it because you want to write a bloody good story. You know? V for Vendetta is written by Alan Moore, and I can't stand Alan Moore, but I will admit it's a bloody good story, and the film's pretty good too. You know? um, so yeah, I think the difference is like modern day writers now is are they really the best you can actually hire, or are they just hired because of their leanings politically? And I think that's the biggest problem with mainstream media in general, not just comics or fantasy books, but just everything in general. There's a lot of talented writers out there, and they're not getting a shoe in because they voted Trump or they voted Boris Johnson.
Yeah, there is a filter. There's definitely a filter. You will find yourself censored, and you will find that these publishing companies want to control your work. And it will always be so to some extent because they want to control what's safe and what isn't. When I think of a cover like Born Guilty by Jason Kuna, you could not have a cover like that. And he himself tried, and they would not print a cover like that. They would not publish a cover like that of a baby being branded with all of these anti-European slurs. They couldn't do that. It's too revealing. It's too powerful. That could not be. That could not be done. Also, in fiction, one of the main things you see is the denial of biological differences between men and women. Fiction works that have some sort of gender equality theme or message to it, those are the ones that are promoted. You can't imagine more masculine authors and stories being published today. I can't see it.
Well, I mean, when you going back to when Robbie Howard was, he was quite an avid boxer. I think he's fairly decent. So, he had quite a bit of masculinity behind him. I think nowadays, you look at authors, well, arguably the most famous one in the world in a minute, George Martin. I mean, the dude struggles to walk, and I think he's been like that since he was born, where he's so lardy. You know what I mean? I don't think he's going to make it in time to write his last book. You know what I mean? He's just going to overdose on Cheetos at this rate. You know what I mean? Which, yeah, I mean, you look at authors now, they've never had a rough upbringing. And it's not just authors, but Hollywood actors too. You think back in the days when you had Charlton Heston, Charles Bronson, Clint Eastwood, all these John Wayne and that, they had to go through quite a few hardships to get to where they are now. You think now you've got your Ryan Reynolds and you've got your George Clooney's. Admittedly, George Clooney hasn't been popular since the early 2000s. And you got all these other actors in a similar mold where they look like underwear models and all preemie, the soy boy prima donnas, And you think to yourself, where did the men go? What happened to actual men? It's Hollywood, admittedly. I mean, if you're not 13 years old or a woman, you're not getting anywhere near it. But, it's. There just seems to be this, and it's not just even in the mainstream media, but just society in general, where it's just like masculinity is frowned upon. When you look in Kimi Räikkönen, Formula One drivers, a good example, Lewis Hamilton, environment activist supported by an oil company who rides race cars. But anyway, it's like there's a picture of him in basically this sort of checkered moo and a scooter, basically a dress. And then you've got a picture of James Hunt, who was a rider in the 70s, with a bottle of beer, and he's got long hair, and he's built like a proper man, you know? But how do we get from that to basically someone going around in a dress and a stupid hat on a scooter? You know, you know, it boggles the mind. I blame the 90s. They killed everything. I mean, they voted in Tony Blair, and Nirvana was a bloody thing. And let's face it, Kurt Cobain's greatest hit was splattered against the wall.
The destruction of masculinity in the West is planned. I would challenge anyone who finds that an outrageous, unfounded claim to seriously investigate it. It has been planned. The decline of masculinity in the West. And you see people saying, people in the so-called manosphere, many of them which don't go by that label, red pill, which means intersexual gender dynamics, men in those communities say that it's an attack on all masculinity because they'll find non-Western men, non-European men being put on commercials in some sort of emasculating manner, like they're wearing a tutu or whatever. But that is collateral damage. The main target is Western men. The main target is European men, and you can know this to be true because they have no issues putting a non-European man in a more masculine role in a commercial while emasculating the European male. They have no issues doing that. If it was an attack on all masculinity for all of mankind, it would not be like that. In the West, when you see masculinity being portrayed in a negative manner, it is attacking Western masculinity. That's what it's for. And yeah, there is no more masculine fiction. I mean, Fight Club became such a cult classic because it was talking about the subconscious of Western men living in this cradle, in this bubble. So even though it was written by a homosexual Jewish male, it still appealed to a lot of men because the movie was different from the book. And in the movie, these men were taking the burden of male initiation upon themselves because they could not get it elsewhere. They were castrated. So they decided to form their own initiations. You don't see that in the Western canon anymore. You don't see that in movies. You don't see that in fiction. There's no talk of male initiations. There's no talk of rites of passage. There's no praise of masculinity. I mean, you can't even have Boy Scouts. Now it's got to be Boy and Girl Scouts. They can't discriminate, which means they can't freely associate because discrimination is the other side of freedom of association. They're different sides of the same coin.
Oh, it's like, no, I don't know if you've caught it in college football. I think it's Vanderbilt. Probably pronounced that wrong, but oh well, shouldn't have such a stupid name. Basically now it's like they have a female kicker called Sarah Fuller. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, the only reason she's here is basically for a PR stunt. So they don't actually think she's any good at all. They probably think she's really bad, but it's like, hey, look, we can get a lot of media attention with this, so we're going to do it. Which not only does it embarrass the sport, but it's actually embarrassing to women. Which, I mean, I've seen a few comments where they actually agree that this is an embarrassment to just everyone involved. But it's the fact that why when we can't, instead of just putting her in the men's game, why didn't you actually just put more investment into the female sport? You know, it's ridiculous. It really is. It's like you said with the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. Well, why have they got to be intermixed? Why can't you just have Girl Scouts with their own thing, which they were, and you have Boy Scouts? You know, and you just have separate, or you know, you can be together, but basically you have one side that's for girls, one side for boys. So, you know, not calling for segregation, but you just have two different organisations that work together. But it doesn't mean you have to be under the same label. you know,
Mm.
or or just have scouts, you know, like we do over here. It's just called the scouts. You know? um, I find it all a bit silly. Like it's an attack on masculinity. That's what they fear. Yeah, at least that's how it comes across. Um, I mean, I'm being funny, but I'm not Charles Bronson. I mean, I could eat 500 deep fried tiger testicles and I still wouldn't be bloody Charles Bronson. But, you know,
With no soy sauce.
yeah, exactly. um, you know, I'm quite masculine compared to a lot of men out there, and I treat them like I would any other man, and they just can't seem to handle it. And to me, it's pathetic, really. Unfortunately, that's the state of uh, men in the West at the moment, which is exactly what they want. I mean, not being funny, but if we get invaded, like a lot of the guys, because I refuse to call them men, men have testicles. Um, a lot of the guys, especially in the big town, Swindon, near me, they're so pathetic, it's unbelievable. I mean, I didn't realise the testosterone count could go into the minus spectrum of count, you know? Um, and it's a wash with it in there. And I think to myself, we get invaded by a barbarian force from like in the old days before Christianity come over, we'd be screwed
Mm.
royally. You know what I mean? I think to myself, why would China invade? I mean, it's very likely they will fucking invade at this point. Let's face it, they've already tried a bloody chemical warfare on us. Um, you know, so I'm thinking to myself, if we actually come to taking up arms to defend this country, not that the government will let you, but let's just work on that theory that we have to. They won't be able to defend. They'll just run away and hide and go to a safe space or try and get their girlfriend to fight for them. You know, it's it's frustrating. Being a man in the modern world is a very rare thing.
Well, I mean, just the ads for the British Army are ridiculous, ridiculous. Um, of course, you'll find non-Europeans in those ads. I mean, you'll find one where there was a Muslim praying, and everybody waits for him to pray. You know, combat situation out in the field doing a mission, but you gotta wait for the guy to pray. It's absolutely ridiculous. And of course, putting women into the army, um, primarily an offense to men, a degradation of women. The biology and the selection for humans is very clear. Men are the fighting gender, women are the nurturing gender. Women can have a place in the army, but as combatants, that is complete, total denial of our nature and the kind of animal that we are, and sexual dimorphism, and everything that we know about men and women. We know how performance is lowered whenever you put a woman among the ranks of men, not because she's evil, not because she's doing anything wrong, but because it's in the nature of men to want to protect women. It will be absolute chaos if, in a combat scenario, you have a group of men and a couple of women. What happens if the women get injured? The men will simply respond in a different manner. Male behavior changes once there is a woman present. All it takes is a single woman. It changes immediately. So this is actually dangerous. The of course the attack on masculinity, like you said, how does a country defend itself? And ultimately, it's a failed strategy that no peoples that is alive today has followed through. You can't have your women out on the battlefield and exist as a people. Not for long anyway. You need women to reproduce. You cannot have them in the battlefield. It's just insanity.
Well, I mean, the army over here has the retainment problem. And so, well, if you employ lots of women, I'm not misogynistic. You know, I'm not this. Oh, women should be able to do this. They should do this because they're women and all that. You know, I'm not
Well, let's be
fully that.
let's be frank.
But
Let's be frank about it. Misogynist is a meaningless word that boils down to an anti-male slur, because misogynist is thrown out whenever you want to point out biological facts about
Well,
men
yeah.
and women, right? So it really is ultimately, at the end of the day, an anti-male slur.
I know, but I'm not
Yeah.
one of these guys who just treat them like absolute shit because they're women, which does happen. I've seen it happen myself. But I get what you mean, and
Mm-hmm.
but the thing is that if you employ loads of women, well, what do they want to do? Well, they want to go and have a family. What's that
Yes.
mean? Well, they're going to leave the army to look after, like, give birth to their children and be with them and raise them up, aren't they? And it's like, oh, why are we losing numbers? And it's like, well, it's because basically they've all got pregnant and they're tending to their children, which all women want to do. Well, all sane women anyway. You know what I mean? And men too. Obviously, men don't need to leave the army to do it. I mean, I personally would because I value my children over my country any day. That's just me. Um, but it does happen, unfortunately. And that's the thing. If you don't have anyone to fight your battles for you because you've basically made them unwelcome, you're going to lose.
Mm. Well, and of
Which,
course, there's a point at which it intersects, right? The the number of times that a father had to go and join the army to protect his kids, that's definitely happened before. And then there were other times when joining the army would be foolish because that's at a time where your country isn't fighting a war to protect the people, it's fighting a war that is not in the interests of the people.
well, especially in today's world, I mean, let's face it, how many wars have actually been started lately for the right reasons? I mean, for all of Trump's faults, he hasn't started one yet. I mean, he's actually been trying to stop him, which is a sure sign that he's not a politician because he's not interested in war. Um, I mean, how many literally just been started just for people to make money? This whole war for oil thing. I mean, I don't buy into it, but I certainly don't think they went there for the right reasons. If you know what I mean. But who knows? It's like the Black Sabbath song, isn't it? Politicians never go to war; they always start them, or something like that. But um, yeah, I mean, your army matters. Not just in modern day, but every sort of army that's ever existed throughout medieval history. Well, medieval times, the Georgian, Tudor, Roman, you name it. They've
Mm-hmm.
all been predominantly male, if not exclusively male, because you need your strongest warriors out there. You know. Um, I suppose really the exception to the rule in some ways is Boadicea. But then she wasn't a frontline soldier. She rode a chariot. You know what I mean?
Mm.
I personally think she lost it because she was too emotional and met them in open battle. Um, that's going back to a time when we have to talk about that later. But yeah, I mean, the problem is with modern day is like there's an attack on masculinity and it's showing in the modern world. I mean, where you live, I mean, the amount of people, like poetry slams outnumber the amount of people. You know what I mean? I don't think that's the worst place in your country of present residence. But
Well,
it says a lot about it. I mean, if you go to Seattle now, I mean, just look at Seattle for a good example of the state of Western masculinity.
yeah, yeah, it is bad over here as well. Yeah, the decline in masculinity that you see, and of course, yeah, it translates into fiction, and it's very difficult to believe in fiction when it denies biological realities. That's the problem with certain political ideologies or certain meme pathogens infecting writers, is that I can't believe your world if it doesn't follow some things about reality. And when part of your book is like an all-female army or something like that, it's just difficult to believe it, man. Difficult to believe it, or a world of gender equality. That's just not impossible. That's just not possible. Equality is the cult of the envious. It doesn't actually exist in nature. Nature doesn't have any use for equality. Not even twins are equal. So yeah, this attack on masculinity, it does play itself into fiction, and you wonder when will some of this masculine fiction return. And I've read your stuff. It's yeah. I don't detect any political message in it.
That's, I mean, my politics are in there, but where it's not written as a piece of propaganda, you don't notice it. Yeah, not necessarily my politics, but certainly my philosophy on life, how I view it.
Mm-hmm.
Rather, I don't like saying like inserting my politics. That to me, inserting my outlook on life and the philosophies I live by is the term I prefer. Because unfortunately, if you insert politics, you end up getting what you got now, which is propaganda, and it sucks that the writing suffers as a a large a large portion of writing nowadays is, while not being outright terrible, although it's not good, it does suffer massively because of it. And I mean, you look at definitely the final season of Game of Thrones, the TV series. I mean, because we're not going to get a final book, that's for sure. Um, Basically, you could tell that they just basically wanted pussy power in that.
Oh yeah.
I'd even say Series 7 with Arya, especially Arya. I used to like Arya, and I bloody can't stand her. Where basically it's like, oh, she saved Westeros from the Night King. You go to Sansa, no, she's Queen of the North, and Arya becomes Dora the Explorer, and a wheel, and a cripple's king, even though he said he can't ever be a lord, and on all this, but consistent writing, consistent as pigeon shit, really. Let's face it. Yeah, that's what politics. That's what inserting political propaganda does. It ruins everything. And unfortunately, I mean, look at Star Wars. Look at Rey. I
Oh
mean, I'm not
yes.
being funny, but her forehead's bigger than the Death Star itself. You know what I mean? But it's like now the story is absolutely shocking. That basically she doesn't earn anything. Why? Because feminism. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um,
No, they
but
they come pre-packaged with everything that a male hero would acquire along the hero's journey. There's no need for training, there's no need for struggle, no need for conflict. And when you take those things out of a story, you don't have a story. You don't have any character development. It's not real. It doesn't meet what happens in the stories of all people all the time, 24/7, which is struggle, conflict, problems, challenges.
it's just incompetent writing, and unfortunately, that's what they're not after. Good writing. They are after political messaging, which that's what they're after. Ray is a very good example of that. If you well, not just Ray, but everything to do with Star Wars in general, really at the moment. I know everyone goes on about the Mandalorian. I haven't seen it myself, but I just think people like it because it's less shit than the films.
It's Baby
you know?
Yoda. Everybody likes Baby Yoda.
Oh, really? I want to kick him into orbit. So,
Yeah,
well,
Hollywood has given us these faux heroes and these fictional heroes, and then later it has come and given them to us again to spite us. Like it gives you a toy, it takes it back from you, it destroys it, mangles it up, and then it gives it back to you. Because for a lot of these stories, really, because the TV shows and the movies are not that good, people only gravitate toward them because they don't have anything else. Nothing against Star Wars, and I'm gonna sound like a Star Wars critic or like someone who has an issue with someone who likes Star Wars or is a big fan. It's not my cup of tea. If you like it, that's fantastic. But you gotta wonder what caused so many people to gravitate toward Star Wars even more than their own people's mythology and their own people's folklore and traditions and stories. It doesn't seem to me that great of an epic. not compared to what we already had in the Western canon.
I mean, I like Star Wars. I prefer the extended universe more, like the Old Republic, admittedly. Um,
The
but
silence there
I
was you
get your
killing
meaning.
me in your mind.
I am not that much of a Star Wars fanboy. I assure you. I mean, I can't take a franchise seriously that has teddy bears killing stormtroopers with rocks and bloody bits of sharp stick. Sorry. Um, you've lost me on that one. it it doesn't matter how good the film is. You literally have Paddington Bear killing stormtroopers. Well done. Um, yeah, with Star Wars, the actual story itself, meh. I mean, if it weren't for Darth Vader, I probably wouldn't watch it. I'll admit that. Well, Vader and the Emperor, especially the Emperor, to me, with the prequels, I merely when I watched the prequels the first time, I thought they're crap, but as I've got older, I've come to appreciate them more. Again, Darth Sidious, or Emperor Palpatine, is my favourite part of the prequels, and probably my favourite part of Star Wars in general. But as far as the actual story, I mean, the story in the prequels is pretty good. If you actually follow the political aspects of it anyway, is absolutely phenomenal. But if you just take out all the parts with Anakin, especially in Attack of the Clones, it would be probably the best film ever made. Um, but I get your meaning. When there's, to me, in our own mythology, there are better stories, but unfortunately, they're seldom told. I mean, a lot of the stories I know now, I was never told once at school or even at college at all. Most of them I learned through talking to fellow YouTubers, especially one called the Antlered One. I highly recommend his channel. And Hans Hugren too, if you want some good insight into our community. But yeah, I mean, there's not exactly a lot of stories out there. I mean, Star Wars is a good example. I mean, I'll take it intravenously over the shit that come afterwards, but let's face it, who fucking wouldn't? Yeah, I get your meaning when I think that there are better stories in our own folklore that need to be explored, and hopefully they'll come to light more.
And this is a perfect place to end it because, yeah, exploring some of those stories, I highly recommend you doing so on this channel. I think it's perfect. Getting more into what some of the inspiration is for the work that you're doing and stories that influenced you. Yeah, I think that would be very cool for people to check out and help them gain an understanding behind English and Irish mythology, etc. I think that'd be perfect. For today, that will be the end of it. I hope everyone who's listened has enjoyed it. Stay safe. This is goodbye from me, and
Goodbye, good folk.